Hey, I'm Oriana. Let me tell you a story. Disclaimer. In these videos, I talk about things that are really, really sad, heavy, depressing, dark things. And you don't see me crying a lot. People might wonder, how can she talk about these things and not cry? Does she not hurt anymore? Does she not find it sad? First of all, having a camera running really changes your whole physical response. For me, at least, I really find that talking to people or cameras, it really suppresses a lot of the intense emotions. So I do most of my crying by myself at night. My kids are in bed and I have a moment to sit down in silence and really process my thoughts and my feelings, and that's when I cry. Also in the car, crying and driving, definitely a thing. And I don't want you to think that because I talk to you and I don't cry, that means I'm not feeling things. There is not much worse than planning your own husband's funeral. There were so many moments leading up to it and planning it and sitting at the funeral home and talking to them about everything, where I just sat there and I was like, is this really happening? Like, am I really sitting here planning Jeff's funeral? It's just so unbelievable and unthinkable. So when you're planning a funeral, this happens within a week or so of the person's passing. From what I understand, that's typical. The challenging part is that you're planning your spouse's funeral while you yourself haven't even processed the death. You're still in shock. I had to plan the funeral and make all these decisions and do all this administrative stuff when I wasn't even myself. I wasn't thinking clearly. Thank God I had tons of support from friends and family. Like, I had friends and family just sitting with me at my kitchen table every day, just hashing out plans and notes and who do I need to call, what do I need to do, what decisions do I need to make. When we went to the funeral home to sit down with them and plan everything for the service, it was myself, my husband's parents, and his sister. And it was nice for us to all do that together and make those decisions together. I don't really have any idea how I made it through the funeral planning. You just kind of forge ahead and do what you have to do. I didn't know what to expect on the day of. I didn't know how I would handle the funeral, especially with my kids being there, and they were 4 and 3, and I had a 2-week-old baby, so I wasn't sure how I would handle all the kids and breastfeeding and greeting all the people, and all while carrying the weight of why we were there in the first place. I remember the day of, I remember the morning and getting ready. I remember telling the kids that we were going to have a party to say bye to Daddy. I told them it was called a funeral, but I wanted them to understand the context of why so many people would be gathered, why I would be talking about Daddy and other people would be talking about Daddy. I was also worried about how they would react to seeing me standing at the service and crying and speaking about their dad. So I explained to them, Mommy's going to talk about Daddy because everybody has come together because we miss him and we want to say goodbye, and Mommy's going to cry, but I'm okay. I wanted them to understand that even though I was emotional, I was okay, and that it's normal to be upset and to cry when you miss somebody. That's all okay. I didn't want them to worry that I wasn't going to be okay. I specifically very clearly remember the car ride. My sister drove me and the kids in her van, and I remember sitting in the back seat looking out the window, and I just remember thinking to myself, this is the worst day of my life. This is happening right now. I am driving to my own husband's funeral. It was such an intolerable thought, and yet there I was living it. And I cried. We got to the funeral home and I cried, and we greeted some friends who were there to help us set up, and I cried. The funeral home was amazing. The staff were amazing, and we went up to the room where the visitation would be, and we walked into the room, and my husband was in a box. I kept my kids in a separate room because the casket was open, and as much as I was and am 100% on board with them being at the funeral, understanding what death means and being able to say goodbye, I didn't want them to actually see his body because I wanted to preserve their visual memory of their dad. As it is, because they're so young, their memories of him will be snapshots, and I want those snapshots to be laughing and playing and cuddling, and if they want to see pictures of the funeral later, there'll be pictures for them to see. But I don't want his body that doesn't even really look like him and is in a box. I didn't want that to be one of their snapshots. So they went into another room and there were plenty of friends and family there to play with them and keep them occupied. And we brought some toys. My family basically took care of them for the whole service. Jeff was a really awesome social guy, and he had a lot of friends, and he was the kind of guy who, even if you just met him once or briefly, he kind of stuck with you. So I anticipated that there would be a lot of people at the funeral. There were 600 people at the funeral. That's how many people he touched or affected in some way. And when I spoke, my opening line was a joke about breaking the capacity of the funeral home. And we literally did. They had to open up additional rooms and fill all of them, and they had to broadcast the service on internal televisions so that everybody could see, because we couldn't all fit into the chapel. Jeff was a DJ and he sold out many clubs in his heyday, and it was just so funny and appropriate that he also sold out the funeral home. I spoke first, and Jeff's parents and sister spoke, my mom, my niece, and I invited Jeff's closest friends to speak. So a lot of the guys who were in our wedding party spoke, and all of them vowed to take care of me and the kids and help us and be there for us. And it was really special to feel that kind of love and support. And I sat there in the front row holding my baby, who was 2 weeks old, and I didn't cry. I just took it all in. And every once in a while I would look at the casket and just think, who's in there? How can Jeff be in a box? Jeff was like larger than life. It's like you can't even fit him in a box. And I would look at his picture and I would just be like, why is there a picture of him here? What are we doing here? And the denial was still so strong. So many times throughout that day I had that feeling over and over again, that I just could not believe we were at Jeff's funeral. It made no sense. But I would look around and say to myself, nope, this is happening. Jeff is gone. This is his funeral. Right after the service, they put us in like a little holding room to let the crowd kind of dissipate, because it was 600 people now that needed to file out of the funeral home. And at this point I had greeted more or less like 500 people. I personally greeted them, hugged them, received their condolences. I was exhausted, and I was still breastfeeding mom to a newborn who wasn't sleeping through the night. I was beside myself, not to mention all the emotional stuff I was dealing with. So we more or less hid in this room because I just felt like I couldn't even talk to anybody else. I couldn't say hi to anybody else. There were still a lot of people I hadn't greeted. I explained to my kids that we were now going to a second party for daddy, one more party for daddy, which was the reception, which my friends had graciously booked and planned everything for me. I just didn't have the capacity to do it, and they took all the reins and they found the perfect venue, which was a hockey arena in Jeff's hometown, the city that we were from, Scarborough, by the way. And my son, who was 4.5 at the time, he was so tired and rubbing his eyes, and he was so sad. And in that moment, in that holding room, after the service was all done, that's when he crumpled to the floor and he started weeping, and he just said, I want daddy. And he just cried. I think that actually was the first time I had actually seen him cry for daddy. It was like a hot knife to my heart. It was soul crushing. And my friend happened to be there next to me, and she cried and I cried and I hugged her and I just said, what am I gonna do? And in that moment, I couldn't believe what was being asked of me to get my kids through this. Never mind getting myself through it, but how do I make this okay for them? As a parent, you just want to make things okay. And this was the first time I felt completely out of control and that there was no way for me to fix this. And I just felt like my son was never going to be okay. But I took a deep breath and I hugged him, and he told me that he didn't want to go to another party for daddy. So my friend who was there offered to take him with her to play with her kids and to just get out of here and do something fun and leave the funeral. And I thought that was a really great idea and exactly what he needed. But he was so emotional and so tired, and he kept saying, I just want to go home. I just want to be with you and go home. I don't want to go to another party for daddy, and I don't want to go to your friend's house. I just want to go home. And it was like 20 minutes of negotiating with him and trying to be firm, but also trying to be gentle, but also being pulled in 1,000 other directions by all the other people who were there for me to support me. And people were coming up and talking to me and asking me what my plans were and where were we going and when were we leaving. And finally, after 20 minutes of negotiations, he finally agreed to go with my friend, and she took him, which was such a blessing and such a weight off my shoulders for me to just have my 3-year-old daughter and the newborn. We went to the reception, and it was beautiful and wonderful, and all my friends took care of all the catering, all the food. They set up everything. They dealt with the venue rental. I did nothing. And I didn't even ask them to do this. They just did it. Unbelievable. And there were a couple hundred people there, and more people that I hadn't seen at the service, so I got to greet them at the reception. And I just remember walking around thinking, I just want to crawl under one of these round tables and sleep. I was 100% depleted, and I didn't eat anything. I didn't really have an appetite. That's all I remember about that day. I don't remember going home. I don't remember putting the kids to bed. I don't remember how I felt or what I did once they were all tucked in. But I made it through the hardest day of my life. And that's my story. This video was brought to you by Grief to Growth by Oriana.